And so we made a couple short films, we met a couple of producers, and it was like, look, it doesn't matter. You get $3,000-$5,000, something like that. There's only so much you can do with that money at that level.
Yeah, and technology has made it so that you can certainly tell a fairly simple screenplay, arguably just as well as like a large budget feature. If it's just like a romantic comedy or two people hanging out and talking about, then we come back to, well, what about like a superhero story, or what about a war story?
The first comic we did, Jared pitched me on the idea, and I was like, it's a really good idea, and let's flesh it out. But it was like, look, we can't physically film this, and so we started talking. How does the money go a different way?
Right.
And we said, well, why don't, instead of writing a script and pitching it around or shooting a short film, what if we make a comic?
Right.
And we started bouncing around the idea, okay, but how does that showcase us as filmmakers? And we said, well, if we draw it, it doesn't. It only showcases the story.
Right.
So how do we make it still filmmakers' version? And we said, well, why don't we still create the production, still get our actors and our sets and everything, and shoot it live action? And we'll take those digital stills, and we've had this conversation before, but comics feel like storyboards to films anyway if they're done right.
Yeah.
And so, and especially as the mediums get so closely associated.
I have one question right here. That it's something I've been wrestling with, so I want to ask it so I don't forget. The question was orientation on the page. And I've got a guy who I'm working with who's worked in comics before, and he was talking about characters like Batman and like Superman work well in comics because comics have these big panels where you can
splash
see
pages.
You can see Batman's horns as well as his cape.
Oh,
the whole thing.
Yeah.
But you can't really do that on the screen. You kind of only see half of Batman. Yeah. And that maybe the question is, in taking my story, White Lily, and adopting it as well, should we go for maybe orienting it differently on the page so that it comes out with a more cinematic ratio instead of a more comic book ratio?
It's an interesting take. I mean, I think the splash pages, I do understand that point, that it feels more pronounced in comics when you do that, but essentially what you're saying is you're taking a full body shot, and when you're watching the film, you'll see Batman centered in the middle, him standing on the perch on the on the roof, but you're getting the whole landscape. And in a comic book, you can just focus on the Batman.
Right.
But you can do that digitally now by removing everything else and only focusing on him to be able to still create that kind of splash image, shooting it. I mean, essentially, that's what we had these conversations. Really, we're like, we want to make a comic book. We want to make it feel like a comic book so that when you look at it, you're like, it's a comic. First and foremost, it's a comic. But you get a different feeling about it, thinking this could be a movie, and I don't really need to stretch my brain to associate what this movie could look like, because it can just look like this book because you already technically filmed it. So we said, the logistics of that was, we'll actually do much more practical effects. We'll get everyone in costumes. We'll get everyone on the locations that we want. We won't green screen anything. We'll shoot it practically. Okay, there just won't be sound, and our photographer really did a good job opening up the shutter speeds and getting them to perform. And then taking the very best images of that. It was very funny. In the beginning, we had a much harder time, a fun time kind of letting them perform and figuring out the images and then like posing it exactly as the storyboard was. And then eventually it just got to the point Jared was so fluid with it. He's just like, just take the action, give me the shots, and I can do this in post. And really he has his own kind of method after you take that image of both using the color and the depth of field from that against his both traditional artwork and his digital illustration to create a new image in that storyboard. But since he's both the director and the storyboard artist, he's able to construct both in his mind to know exactly where he plans on going with the photography. And it really works, and he does a beautiful job and very brilliantly, and it went from a very long process to a very, very short one. And there was one point, our first full graphic novel, and I guess this eventually gets that part, was we did everything in this field. It was a science fiction story about an alien in cornfields, and unlike most of them where everyone gets abducted and everyone's like, oh, we got to run, this was the opposite. It was like, oh, there's one, let's pump the shotgun, let's go get this guy. And it's a very kind of Jaws feel to it, and it's a fun romp, but we shot practically in the fields.
You're going to say it was a buffet at the end. Everyone came out and brought out their own dish.
In the beginning they did. They
and the aliens just like corn.
Yeah. or kids. They very like kids. But yeah, so we so that was something that, you know, you look at it and you start analyzing how you're going to produce it as a film. It's, you know, you shoot practically,
right.
or then you move towards CGI. Do you get a green screen? Do you do it, you know, do you do it like Star Wars New Hope where everything's in the desert, or do you do it like George Lucas's Star Wars where they're jumping over green boxes and you're like, okay, we'll pretend everything's there later.
Exactly.
But in a comic book, that you can really play with that, and it's really just a matter of what look you want to get on the page, and really the speed of production, you know, what the budget is. But it's fun to know that it can go to that place where you really creatively can do what you're looking for.
Well, the efficiency is so amazing too.
Yeah,
because it actually gets it done.
Yep.
Versus just remaining an idea, which is so many things that are good scripts don't ever get done.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly,
and that's really the challenge as the artist. I mean, these days, you know, a musician can put his music out there, and let's say it doesn't get discovered. Still, maybe, you know, 20 years from now, you know, their children can go, you know what, my dad made this music, and it has meaning to me.
Yep.
But a screenplay more or less just gathers dust unless it gets made.
Yeah, and unless you're like still an aspiring writer and you have to announce that to someone, you're like, this is what I used to write, and you're reading and go, oh, it's an interesting thing. You're right. I mean, me and my brother were in a band, and you look at those, you know, records that we made, you know, 15 years ago, and you're like, you're right. That music will always be there, good or bad, and it's a different story altogether.
It is,
You know, it exists.
Well, it's bad until it's good, really.
Exactly. Oh yeah, it hasn't hit classic yet. It's only been 15 years. I think another 5, maybe when we're eligible for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I got another 10 years before it's their hit tracks again. What's old is new. But yeah, so and that's really what we felt about the comic. Initially, it was just a pitch piece. We did like 20 pages of one issue that was going to be the act 1 of our first script, and we said, let's go out with this, and we printed it. Because that's better, pitch material than a PDF.
Yeah.
And we went to Comic-Con for no other reason than like printing meant we had to print like 5,000 copies instead of 500 because it just was a cheaper unit price. Okay. And we went to go sell it. And then that first weekend, we had no idea. We sold it at Comic-Con. We had a booth. Now, Jared made a backdrop.
Because you were talking about taking a screenplay and adapting it as a pitch material for making a movie, right?
Right, but that's not actually what we did. We just made a 20-page comic book. We put a cover on it. We made it look like a comic. You know, it had like the barcode, all that kind of stuff.
Scene 1, in fact.
What's up?
You said that was scene 1. Was that right, or act 1?
It was act 1. It was act 1. So it was like
the
first 20 pages of the script became, you know, and in that story, it was titled Barel and the Horror.
Right.
And I saw that. It's wonderful.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. The first issue, we did the first 2 issues, and we took a break, and we then ended up finishing it 2 years ago. But the first issue, it's basically her kind of adapting to her new world. You hear a bunch of mysterious stuff, and then when she turns into the horror and kills her boyfriend, that's like the inciting incident of the script. Boom, that's the end of the book. And so like you get like, ooh, what could that be? And then we'd pitch it to you. But we had this book, and we're like, we'll sell it for a couple bucks, you know, a piece. And we had the lead in the project, who was a 16-year-old girl. I think, well, she was 18 at the time.
Right.
In the Catholic schoolgirl outfit, which, like, yes, that has its own sex appeal.
That's your story, and you're sticking to it.
Yeah, exactly. I swear it was all for the art. But you're looking at, like, when you talk about Wolverine, you see everyone dress up like Wolverine. Hugh Jackman has done such a perfect job. Everyone tries to look like Hugh Jackman now. But at the time, with all the different iterations, you have only the costume to look at. What was nice about the selling point with her was that's actually her. What you're reading and what you're enjoying and what you're experiencing is her. If we make a movie, it doesn't have to star her. Right. But this thing that you are watching, that you want to live forever, is physically a person that you can interact with. And people went crazy for that. And that first weekend, our one issue beat every single issue that was there, including all of Marvel and DC.
Wow.
And we ended up selling like 1,000 copies in 48 hours. And we didn't even know we were doing well. We just thought, okay, there's a lot of people here. And, you know, it became a huge sensation kind of overnight.
That's amazing.
You know, and I never understood why. Right. And people were like, I've never seen anything like this. And at the time,
well, I'll tell you from my perspective, because I'm not an artist. All my family is, but I'm not. So it's a mystifying process to me. When you read a normal comic book or a graphic novel, as good as the artist is, he poses everybody the same. So whatever you're doing, you're seeing a real person there. And she's standing this way and she's looking that way. And then, you know, something frightens her. And so maybe he's being motivated by what he sees and taking that to the artistic level or whatever it is. I don't really care as a viewer. I just like the fact that I'm really experiencing a real person's reactions here.
Yeah.
And real facial expressions. It's exciting, but at the same time, it is art. It's not a movie.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you I'm a writer. This is Paul. I'm a writer. I'm not a actor, et cetera. I'm terrified in front of a camera kind of thing. But I'll tell you, when you watch a movie, it's a very different experience than when you read a book. Because when you read a book, you determine as the consumer the pacing of that product. You think about it, you put it down, you talk to a friend, you text, you go back to the page, whatever. When you watch a movie, the movie determines the tempo of the consumption. And you start it and you finish it in, whatever that is, 91 minutes.
It's a very passive experience.
It's completely different. It may spark the imagination, but more likely than not, you'll go out and get a coffee and forget what you just saw afterwards. So although one does translate into the other, they're very different products. And I think can inspire very different imaginations.